Naomi Caldwell pressed her palm against the worn fabric and felt the cold mountain air whistle through another hole. She had been counting them for the past 10 minutes while the mountain man slept by her fire, his massive frame curled awkwardly on the hard-packed dirt floor of her small cabin. 23 holes in total, some small as her fingertip, others wide enough to let the September chill seep through and settle into a man's bones. It was 1876, and in the high country above Leadville, Colorado, autumn came early, and winter lingered like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. She had found him 3 days ago, collapsed near the creek that ran behind her property, his horse standing guard over him with the loyalty only animals seemed capable of anymore. Fever had taken hold of him, turning his sun-bronzed skin pale and clammy. For 2 days she had fought to bring his temperature down, using every remedy her mother had taught her before the consumption took her 5 years past. Willow bark tea, cool compresses, prayers whispered in the dark hours when death seemed closest. The mountain man had thrashed and mumbled, speaking of traps and pelts and someone named Samuel who Naomi assumed must be dead, given the anguish in his fevered voice. Now he slept peacefully, the crisis passed, and Naomi could finally see him clearly in the morning light that streamed through her single window. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders in waves that would have scandalized the church ladies back in Philadelphia. His jaw was strong and shadowed with several days of stubble, and even in sleep she could see the power in him. His shoulders were broad as an ox yoke, his arms thick with muscle earned from hard living in these unforgiving mountains. His hands, calloused and scarred, looked like they could snap timber or gentle a spooked horse with equal ease. Naomi was 23 and had been living alone in this cabin for 8 months now, ever since her father had died in a mining accident. People in Leadville had expected her to sell the claim and return east, but she had nowhere to go. Philadelphia held nothing but memories of poverty and her stepmother's sharp tongue. Her father had promised her a new life in Colorado, and though he had not lived to see it flourish, Naomi was determined to honor his dream. She ran a small trading post from her cabin, selling supplies to trappers and miners who worked the high country. It was a lonely existence, but it was hers. The mountain man stirred, and Naomi quickly folded his blanket, setting it aside. His eyes opened slowly, and she found herself looking into the clearest gray eyes she had ever seen, the color of storm clouds over the peaks. "Where am I?" His voice was rough from disuse but deep and resonant. "My cabin. About 5 miles up from Leadville. You collapsed near my creek 3 days ago. You had fever." Naomi kept her voice steady and practical, though her heart had inexplicably quickened at his gaze. He tried to sit up and she saw him wince. "Easy. You are still weak, my horse?" "In my lean-to, fed and watered. He is a good animal. He stayed with you." The mountain man nodded, then looked around the cabin, taking in the neat shelves stocked with goods, the stone fireplace, the narrow bed where Naomi slept, the table where she took her meals. His eyes landed on the blanket she had folded. "That is mine." "Yes. It has 23 holes in it. It is a wonder you did not freeze to death weeks ago." She moved to the fireplace and ladled some broth from the pot that hung there. "You need to eat, build your strength." He accepted the bowl from her, their fingers brushing briefly. His hands dwarfed hers, making her feel almost delicate, which was unusual. Naomi was not a small woman. She stood 5 feet 6 inches and had her father's sturdy build. But this man made her feel small in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. "I am Xavier Ashford," he said after taking a long drink of the broth. "I trap in these mountains, have done for 6 years now. Naomi Caldwell, I run the trading post here. My father started it, but he died last winter." Xavier nodded slowly. "I heard about Thomas Caldwell. I am sorry. He was a good man, bought pelts from me a few times." Naomi felt a wave of emotion at hearing someone speak kindly of her father. So few people had known him, and fewer still had appreciated his gentle nature. "He was the best man I ever knew." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Xavier spoke again. "I should not impose on your hospitality any longer. Once I can stand without the room spinning, I will be on my way." "You will stay until you are properly recovered," Naomi said firmly. "I did not nurse you through fever for 3 days just to watch you collapse again before you reached the tree line. Besides, you owe me for the medical supplies I used. We can discuss payment once you are well." A hint of amusement flickered in those gray eyes. "You are a shrewd businesswoman, Miss Caldwell." "Mrs. Caldwell, actually, though I am widowed." The lie came easily. Naomi had learned that claiming widow status kept the rougher elements at bay better than admitting she was an unmarried woman alone. "And yes, I am shrewd. One has to be to survive up here." Xavier finished his broth and handed her back the bowl. "Then I will stay, Mrs. Caldwell, and I will pay my debt. Though I should warn you, I am not an easy patient. I am accustomed to being on my feet. I suspected as much." Naomi took the bowl and went to refill it. But you will follow my instructions, or you can leave now and take your chances with the fever returning. Your choice. She heard a low chuckle behind her. You are a hard woman. The mountains make us all hard, Mr. Ashford. That is how we survive. Over the next week, Xavier's strength returned gradually. Naomi found him to be a man of few words but deep thoughts. He would sit by the fire in the evenings, wrapped in one of her spare blankets since his own was beyond use, and carved small figures from pieces of wood. His hands moved with surprising delicacy for their size, creating tiny birds and wolves and bears. When Naomi admired them, he would shrug and say it was something to do during the long winter nights in his cabin further up the mountain. "Where is your cabin?" she asked one evening, as she mended a shirt for one of her customers. "About 15 miles northwest, near the tree line. Built it myself 4 years ago. It is not much, but it keeps the wind out." He paused in his carving. "Mostly. Is it lonely up there?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Yes. But I prefer my own company to that of most men. Present company excepted, of course." Naomi felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I understand that feeling. I came west to escape people as much as to find a new life. What were you escaping?" She hesitated, then decided there was no harm in honesty. "My stepmother, mostly. After my mother died, my father remarried. It was not a happy arrangement. The woman he chose was cruel and saw me as competition for his affection. When he decided to come west, she made it clear I was not welcome to stay behind. And then your father died, leaving you alone." Xavier's voice held understanding. "Yes, but I am managing. The trading post does well enough. Trappers and miners need supplies, and I provide them. I make enough to live on. It is dangerous for a woman alone up here. I can shoot straight, and I keep my door barred at night. Most men who come here know I will not tolerate trouble." She met his eyes. "I am stronger than I look, Mr. Ashford." "I believe you are, Mrs. Caldwell." He returned his attention to his carving, but Naomi caught the hint of a smile on his lips. As the days passed, an easy rhythm developed between them. Xavier insisted on making himself useful despite his lingering weakness. He chopped wood for her, restocked her shelves, and repaired the sagging door on her lean-to. Naomi protested at first, saying he needed rest, but she quickly realized that idleness made him restless and irritable. He was a man who defined himself by his labor, and she understood that need. She found herself watching him when he worked outside, admiring the play of muscles beneath his worn shirt as he swung the axe. He moved with the confidence of a man completely at ease in the wilderness, and there was a grace to him despite his size. When he came inside smelling of pine and fresh air, Naomi had to remind herself to focus on her work and not on the way her pulse quickened at his presence. One afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after she had found him, Xavier came inside with something bundled in his arms. "A gift," he said, setting it on her table. "Or rather, payment for your care." Naomi unwrapped the bundle and gasped. It was a fur blanket made from beaver pelts stitched together with careful precision. The fur was thick and soft, luxurious against her fingers. "Xavier, this is too much. These pelts are worth a fortune. I have plenty more, and you saved my life. It seems a fair trade." He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "Besides, winter is coming. You will need it." She ran her hand over the fur, touched beyond words. No one had given her such a gift since her father had presented her with her mother's wedding ring before he died. "Thank you. Truly, there is more." Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. "I noticed you were using this." He opened his hand to reveal a small wooden spool with thread wound around it. Naomi recognized it as her last spool, nearly empty. "How did you know I needed more?" "I pay attention." He met her eyes. "I am going into Leadville tomorrow to trade some pelts. I can buy you more thread and anything else you might need. Consider it part of my payment." "You do not need to do that." "I know, I want to." The next morning, Xavier saddled his horse, a sturdy roan gelding he called Red, and headed down the mountain. Naomi watched him go with an unexpected sense of loss. In 2 weeks she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the sound of his voice in the evenings, to the way he made her small cabin feel less lonely. She told herself she was being foolish, that he was just another trapper who would return to his solitary life as soon as he was fully recovered. But her heart did not seem to be listening. He returned at dusk with his saddlebags full of supplies. Thread in 5 different colors, needles, salt, sugar, coffee, and a length of blue fabric that made Naomi catch her breath. "For a dress," Xavier said gruffly, unloading the supplies onto her table. "I noticed yours are worn." Naomi touched the fabric, feeling the quality of the weave. It was the nicest cloth she had seen in years. "Xavier, you cannot keep giving me gifts. You will have no money left. I do not need much money, and I want you to have it." He turned away, busying himself with unsaddling Red. "Winter is hard up here. A woman should have something nice." That night, after a supper of venison stew and bread Naomi had baked that morning, they sat by the fire as usual. But something had shifted between them, a tension that had not been there before. Naomi could feel Xavier's eyes on her as she worked on her mending, and when she glanced up he did not look away. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I have been thinking." He set aside his carving. "My cabin is habitable, but it is not comfortable. This winter will be harsh. I can feel it in my bones. You should not be alone up here when the heavy snows come. I have survived one winter already. Barely, I would wager." His gray eyes were serious. "What if you get sick? What if you run out of firewood? What if the roof caves in under the snow? I will manage, I always do." Xavier leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Or you could winter with me. My cabin is larger, better insulated. I have a good supply of wood laid by. And I know this country better than anyone. You would be safer." Naomi's heart pounded. People would talk. An unmarried woman and a man living together in the wilderness? My reputation would be destroyed. "Then marry me." The words fell between them like stones into still water. Naomi stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" Xavier's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "I know it is sudden. I know we have only known each other 2 weeks. But I am not a man who wastes time with games or pretty speeches. I care for you, Naomi, more than I have cared for anyone in a very long time. You are strong and clever and kind. You deserve better than to struggle alone on this mountain. Xavier, I cannot marry you just for convenience. That is not a reason to bind 2 lives together. It is not just convenience." He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her so they were eye to eye. "I am not good with words. I have spent too many years alone with only the wind for company. But I know what I feel. When I am with you, the loneliness that has followed me for 6 years disappears. You make me want to be more than just a man who traps and survives. You make me want to build something real." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. "I care for you too, but marriage is sacred. It should be based on love, not just mutual affection and practicality. Then give me time to make you love me." Xavier reached out and gently took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "Let me court you properly. Let me prove that I can be the kind of man you deserve. And if by first snow you still do not love me, I will leave you in peace. But if you do," he paused, searching her face. "If you do, then marry me. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone or afraid again." The sincerity in his voice broke through Naomi's defenses. She had been alone for so long, had armored her heart against hurt, but Xavier was not like other men. He was honest and steady and strong. And when she looked at him, she felt something she had thought died with her father. Hope. "All right," she whispered. "Court me. But if I agree to marry you, it will be because I love you, not because winter is coming." Xavier's face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him look younger and almost boyish. "That is all I ask." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. The gesture was so tender, so reverent, that Naomi felt something shift deep in her chest. This man, this rough mountain man who lived alone in the wilderness, had somehow found his way past all her carefully constructed walls. The next weeks were the happiest Naomi could remember. Xavier courted her with a focus and intensity that took her breath away. Every morning he would ride down from his cabin, arriving just after dawn, and spend the day with her. He helped with the trading post, dealing with the rougher customers so Naomi did not have to, and he continued to make improvements to her property. He reinforced her roof, built a proper door for the lean-to, and dug a new privy that was better situated and less likely to freeze in winter. But it was the small things that won her heart. The way he always made sure her water bucket was full. The way he brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, their petals still damp with morning dew. The way he listened when she talked about her mother, about Philadelphia, about her dreams for the future. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always with careful thought and genuine interest. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours. Xavier told her about his life before the mountains. He had been raised on a farm in Ohio, the youngest of 4 boys. When his parents died of influenza, the farm had gone to his oldest brother, and Xavier had headed west to find his own way. He had worked as a ranch hand, a wagon guard, and finally a trapper. He had seen the ugly side of frontier life, the violence and greed that turned men into monsters, and he had chosen to withdraw from it all, seeking peace in solitude. But solitude is not the same as peace, he admitted one night as October painted the aspens gold. "I thought if I went far enough into the wilderness, I could escape the darkness I had seen. But the darkness followed me, it was inside me. The things I had witnessed, the things I had done to survive, they haunted me." Naomi reached out and took his hand. "What changed you?" Xavier turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "When I woke up in your cabin, you were the first thing I saw. You were backlit by the window, and for a moment I thought you were an angel. Then you started ordering me around, and I realized you were very much human." He smiled slightly. "But you gave me something I did not know I needed. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountain. I am glad you did, so am I." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn low. Naomi knew she was falling in love with this man, perhaps had been since the moment she found him by the creek. He was everything she had not known she wanted. Strong but gentle, protective but respectful of her independence, quiet but capable of deep feeling. With Xavier she felt safe in a way she never had before, even with her father. Thomas Caldwell had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, never quite satisfied with what he had. Xavier was the opposite. He knew who he was and what he wanted, and that certainty was deeply attractive. As October slipped toward November, the weather began to turn. The first light snows dusted the high peaks, and the aspens dropped their golden leaves like coins scattered across the forest floor. Naomi and Xavier spent more time inside now, and the small space of the cabin seemed to shrink around them. She was intensely aware of his presence, of the way his shoulder would brush hers when they worked at the table together, of how his eyes would follow her as she moved around the cabin. One evening as she was preparing supper, Xavier came up behind her and gently turned her to face him. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his voice made her nervous. "What is it?" "I love you, Naomi." The words were simple, direct, utterly sincere. "I have loved you for weeks now, but I wanted to be sure before I said it. I am sure now. You are the finest woman I have ever known, and I would count myself the luckiest man alive if you agreed to be my wife." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. I think I have since the moment you woke up and your first concern was for your horse. Any man who cares for his animals like that is a good man." Xavier laughed, a full, rich sound that she had rarely heard from him. "Red will be pleased to know he helped me win your heart." "He was a factor," Naomi admitted, smiling through her tears. "But it was you, Xavier. Your kindness, your strength, your honesty. You never tried to be anything other than who you are, and who you are is exactly the man I needed." He cupped her face in his large hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "May I kiss you?" "Yes." His lips met hers softly, almost tentatively, as if he was afraid she would shatter. But when Naomi pressed closer, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened. Xavier pulled her against him, and she felt the strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Xavier said again, his forehead resting against hers. "Not because winter is coming or because it is practical, but because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you." "Yes," Naomi whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed a week later in Leadville by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. It was a simple ceremony, witnessed by the general store owner and his wife, but to Naomi it was perfect. Xavier wore his cleanest shirt and had trimmed his hair and beard. She wore a dress made from the blue fabric he had bought her, stitched by her own hands in the evenings while he carved by the fire. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Mrs. Henderson from the general store actually dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. They spent their wedding night in Naomi's cabin, though it was now their cabin. Xavier had moved his belongings down from his mountain place over the past few days, and they planned to live in Naomi's cabin through the winter, since it was closer to the trading post. In spring, they would decide where to settle permanently. Their wedding night was sweet and gentle. Xavier was patient and careful with Naomi, who had lied about being a widow and was actually as inexperienced as he had suspected. He seemed to know, or perhaps he simply did not care, because he took his time, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms under the beaver fur blanket he had made for her, listening to the wind whistle through the pines outside. "I never thought I would be this happy," Naomi murmured against his chest. "I thought my life would be one of survival, nothing more." "We will do more than survive," Xavier promised, stroking her hair. "We will build something good here, a real home. Maybe a family if you want that." "I do want that. Someday," he agreed, and kissed the top of her head. The first heavy snow came 2 weeks after their wedding in late November. Naomi woke to find the world transformed, every surface blanketed in white. Xavier was already up, stoking the fire and making coffee. He had taken to rising early to care for the animals and make sure the cabin was warm before Naomi woke, and she loved him all the more for these small acts of devotion. "It is really coming down," he observed as she joined him at the window. "We will be snowed in for a few days, I expect. Do we have enough supplies?" "More than enough. I made sure of that." He put his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "We could be snowed in for a month and still have plenty." "Show off," she teased, leaning into him. "Just taking care of my wife." The word still gave her a thrill. Wife. She was Xavier Ashford's wife. Sometimes she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. They spent the snowed-in days working on projects. Xavier had decided to build furniture for the cabin, starting with a proper bed frame to replace the narrow cot Naomi had been using. He worked with quiet concentration, measuring and cutting and fitting pieces together with the same precision he brought to his carving. Naomi watched him sometimes, admiring the skill of his hands and the way his brow furrowed when he was focused on a difficult joint. She, meanwhile, was working on a quilt. It had been her mother's tradition to make a quilt for every major life event, and Naomi wanted to honor that tradition. She had been collecting fabric scraps for months, and now she laid them out on the table, arranging them into a pattern. The quilt would be made of squares in shades of blue, green, and brown, the colors of the mountains in different seasons. "That is beautiful," Xavier said, coming to look over her shoulder. "Your mother taught you?" "Yes, she was a wonderful quilter. I wish you could have met her. She would have liked you. I wish I could have met her too." He bent and kissed Naomi's temple. "But I think she would be happy to know her daughter is loved and cared for." "I think so too." As the snow continued to fall, piling higher and higher around the cabin, Naomi and Xavier settled into married life. They developed routines and rhythms, learning each other's habits and preferences. Xavier discovered that Naomi was not a morning person and needed at least 1 cup of coffee before she could engage in conversation. Naomi learned that Xavier had nightmares sometimes, remnants of his years in the wilderness, and that the best way to soothe him was simply to hold him until the fear passed. They talked about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about the different animals he trapped and how to read their signs in the snow. Naomi taught him the rudiments of bookkeeping, so he could help her manage the trading post accounts. They discussed their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Naomi had never felt so known by another person, so completely accepted for who she was. One night, as they lay in the new bed Xavier had built, Naomi asked him about the old blanket, the one with 23 holes that she had counted when he first arrived. "It was my father's," Xavier said quietly. "The only thing I have from him. He gave it to me the week before he died. I have been using it for 10 years now, and I suppose I should have replaced it long ago. But I could not bring myself to do it. It was my last connection to him, I understand." Naomi snuggled closer to him. "I still have my mother's sewing kit. Some of the needles are so old they are barely usable, but I cannot give them up. We hold on to what we can of the people we love, yes." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about something." "What?" "I want to make you a new quilt. Not to replace your father's blanket, but to be something of our own. Something that represents this new life we are building together." Xavier's arm tightened around her. "I would like that very much. It will be our quilt. The one we sleep under for the rest of our lives." "Naomi." His voice was thick with emotion. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I hope you know that." She turned in his arms so she could see his face in the firelight. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me too. You saved me, Xavier. Not just from being alone, but from giving up on the idea that life could be good again." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and they came together with the tenderness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Afterward, wrapped in each other and the beaver fur blanket, Naomi felt a peace she had never known before. This was home, not the cabin, not Colorado, but this man and the life they were creating together. December brought even heavier snows, and the trading post saw few customers. Xavier used the time to hunt, bringing back elk and deer that he butchered and stored in the lean-to, which was cold enough to keep the meat frozen. Naomi worked on her quilt whenever she had a spare moment, stitching the squares together with careful precision. She wanted it to be perfect, to be something Xavier would treasure. On Christmas Eve, they made a small celebration. Xavier had managed to get sugar and dried fruit on his last trip to Leadville, and Naomi baked a cake that was dense and sweet and probably not quite right. But Xavier ate 2 pieces and declared it the best thing he had ever tasted. They exchanged gifts by the fire. Xavier gave Naomi a pair of fur-lined gloves he had made from rabbit pelts, soft and warm and perfectly fitted to her hands. Naomi gave Xavier a new shirt she had sewn from wool fabric, knowing his old shirts were wearing thin. "It is perfect," Xavier said, running his fingers over the careful stitches. "You are too good to me. Impossible. You deserve all the goodness in the world." They sat together in front of the fire, Xavier's arms around Naomi, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside. The cabin was warm and snug. The larder was full, and they had each other. Naomi thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. In September, she had been alone and resigned to a life of solitude. Now she had a husband who loved her, a home that felt secure and hope for the future. What are you thinking about? Xavier asked, his lips against her hair. How happy I am, how grateful. I am grateful too, every single day. They stayed up late that night, talking and laughing and simply being together. When they finally went to bed, Naomi fell asleep almost immediately, warm and content in Xavier's embrace. She dreamed of spring, of green grass and wildflowers and the sound of children laughing. It was a good dream full of promise. January and February were the hardest months. The cold was brutal, and even with Xavier's careful preparations, there were days when it was a struggle to keep the cabin warm enough. They burned through wood at an alarming rate, and Xavier spent hours each day chopping more, his breath creating clouds in the frigid air. Naomi worried about him working in such cold, but he always came in with a smile, his cheeks ruddy and his eyes bright. I am built for this weather, he assured her, warming his hands at the fire. I have been wintering in these mountains for years. A little cold will not hurt me. A little cold? Xavier, it is below zero out there. Exactly, only a little cold. He grinned at her expression. Trust me, wife, I know my limits. Despite the harsh weather, or perhaps because of it, their bond deepened. They were forced into close quarters for weeks on end, and instead of growing irritated with each other, they grew closer. Naomi discovered that Xavier had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed and happy. Xavier discovered that Naomi could be surprisingly playful when she let her guard down. They laughed together, worked together, and loved together, building a partnership that felt unshakable. In early March, as the worst of winter began to loosen its grip, Naomi finished the quilt. It had taken her 4 months of careful work, but the result was stunning. The squares she had pieced together formed a pattern called Bear Paw, and the colors blues and greens and browns evoked the mountain landscape they called home. She had quilted it with tiny, even stitches, and backed it with soft flannel Xavier had bought for her in Leadville. She presented it to him on a sunny afternoon when the snow was finally beginning to melt in earnest. For you, she said, laying it across his lap. For us. Xavier unfolded the quilt slowly, his eyes taking in every detail. She watched his face, nervous about his reaction. He said nothing for a long moment, just ran his hands over the fabric, tracing the pattern with his fingers. Naomi, he finally said, his voice hoarse. This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. You made this for me? For us, to replace the old blanket with all its holes. This one will keep you warm, I promise. He looked up at her, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. I do not deserve you. Yes, you do. She sat beside him and took his hand. You deserve to be warm and comfortable and loved. You have spent too many years with only a threadbare blanket and your loneliness for company. You deserve better. Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you, more than I knew it was possible to love another person. I love you too. That night, they slept under the new quilt for the first time. It was soft and warm and heavy, and Naomi felt a deep satisfaction knowing she had created something that would last for years, something that would shelter and comfort them through countless nights. Xavier's old blanket, the one with 23 holes, was folded carefully and placed in the trunk at the foot of their bed. It was a relic of his old life, but it deserved to be honored for the service it had provided. As March turned to April, the trading post became busy again. Trappers who had been holed up for the winter emerged to sell their pelts and buy supplies. Miners who had been working underground all winter needed food and tools. Naomi and Xavier worked side by side, managing the influx of customers and building the business. Xavier's presence made a significant difference. The rougher men who might have tried to intimidate Naomi when she was alone thought twice when they saw her husband's imposing figure and steady gray eyes. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Naomi collapsed onto the bed with a sigh. I am exhausted. Xavier sat beside her and began rubbing her feet, which were sore from standing all day. You worked hard today. Too hard, maybe. We both did. But it is good for business. Business is important, but so is your health. He looked at her seriously. You have been tired a lot lately. Are you feeling well? Naomi hesitated. She had been wondering the same thing herself. She was sleeping more than usual, and certain smells that had never bothered her before now made her feel nauseated. She had missed her monthly courses too, but she had not wanted to say anything until she was sure. I think, she said slowly, that I might be with child. Xavier's hands stilled on her feet. Truly? I am not certain yet. But the signs are there. He moved up the bed to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. How do you feel about that? Scared, excited, happy. She searched his face. How do you feel about it? All of those things. A smile spread across his face, but mostly happy. Naomi, the idea of having a child with you, of building a family together, it is more than I ever hoped for. She felt tears prick her eyes. You are going to be such a good father. I hope so. My father was a good man and I want to be like him. patient and kind and always there when needed. You are already all of those things." They held each other for a long time, processing the news and what it would mean for their future. A baby would change everything, but Naomi felt ready for it. With Xavier by her side, she felt capable of anything. Over the next weeks, as her pregnancy became more certain, they began making plans. The cabin would need to be expanded before winter came again. They would need a cradle, baby clothes, more supplies. Xavier threw himself into preparations with his characteristic focus, determined to make sure Naomi and the baby would have everything they needed. In May, he began building an addition to the cabin. With help from a few men he hired in Leadville, he expanded the structure, adding a second room that would serve as a bedroom for them, and eventually the children. The original cabin would become the main living area and trading post. It was hard work, but Xavier seemed energized by it. He would come in at the end of each day covered in sawdust and grinning, telling Naomi about the progress they had made. Naomi, meanwhile, focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny gowns and blankets, using scraps from the quilt and new fabric Xavier brought her. She talked to other women in Leadville who had children, learning what to expect and how to prepare. Mrs. Henderson from the general store became a particular friend, offering advice and encouragement. "You are lucky to have a man like Xavier," Mrs. Henderson said one day when Naomi was in town buying supplies. "Many men leave everything to do with babies to their wives, but he seems genuinely involved." "He is wonderful," Naomi agreed. "I could not ask for a better husband. My John was the same when our children were born. Men like that are rare. You hold on to him." "I intend to." Summer in the Colorado mountains was glorious. The meadows burst into bloom with wildflowers and the days were warm and bright. Naomi's pregnancy progressed well, though she tired easily and had to rest frequently. Xavier was endlessly solicitous, always making sure she was comfortable and not working too hard. He took over most of the physical labor of running the trading post, insisting that Naomi focus on staying healthy. In July, they received word that a band of Ute Indians had been seen in the area. Some of the townsfolk were nervous, remembering conflicts from years past, but Xavier was unconcerned. "The Ute have always been fair in their dealings with me," he said. "I trade with them regularly. They are good people." A week later, 3 Ute men arrived at the trading post. They were looking for ammunition and salt, and they had beautiful beaded leather goods to trade. Xavier greeted them warmly, and Naomi watched as he negotiated in a mixture of English and Ute language he had picked up over the years. The transaction was conducted with respect on both sides, and when the men left, they nodded to Naomi with what seemed like approval. "They are curious about you," Xavier explained after they left. "A white woman running a trading post in the mountains is unusual, but they respect courage and strength, and they can see you have both. I am glad. I do not want trouble with anyone." "There will not be trouble. The Ute remember that your father was honest in his dealings, and they can see that you are the same." As autumn approached again, the cabin addition was complete. Xavier had done beautiful work, creating a bedroom that was spacious and well insulated, with a large window that looked out over the mountains. He built a bed frame even larger than the first, and Naomi made curtains from fabric printed with tiny flowers. The cradle sat in the corner, waiting for its occupant. The baby was due in early November, and as October painted the aspens gold once more, Naomi felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She was as prepared as she could be, but the actual prospect of childbirth was daunting. Women died in childbirth, especially in remote areas without access to doctors. But Xavier was confident and calm, and his steadiness helped soothe her fears. "You are strong," he would tell her when she expressed worry. "You are the strongest woman I know. You will be fine, and so will our baby." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have faith in you. You have survived everything life has thrown at you. You will survive this too." His confidence proved justified. On November 10th, after a long but not overly difficult labor, Naomi gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Xavier was with her the entire time, holding her hand and encouraging her, and when he finally held his son for the first time, Naomi saw tears stream down his rugged face. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, cradling the tiny infant with infinite gentleness. "Naomi, you did so well. He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Naomi asked, exhausted but happy. Xavier looked at the baby for a long moment, then said, "Samuel. After my best friend who died in a mining accident 6 years ago. It was his death that sent me into the mountains. I think he would have liked to be remembered this way. Samuel Ashford." Naomi smiled. "I like it. Hello, Samuel." The baby made a small sound, and both parents laughed with delight. They had created a life together, a tiny person who was part of each of them. It felt like a miracle. The first weeks with Samuel were exhausting but joyful. Xavier proved to be a natural father, completely unafraid of the tiny infant. He would walk Samuel around the cabin at night when the baby was fussy, singing old songs in his deep voice until Samuel fell asleep. He changed diapers without complaint and never seemed to mind when the baby spit up on his shirt. Naomi watched him with growing love, thinking that she could not have chosen a better father for her children. Winter came again, but it seemed less harsh with Samuel in their lives. The cabin was warm and cozy, and the sound of the baby's cries and coos filled it with life. Naomi recovered quickly from the birth, and soon she was back to helping with the trading post, though Xavier insisted she not overdo it. They worked out a system where Naomi would mind the baby and handle customers, while Xavier did the heavy work and made trips to Leadville for supplies. On Christmas Eve, their second as a married couple, they sat by the fire with Samuel asleep in his cradle. Xavier had pulled out his old blanket, the one with 23 holes, and laid it on the table. "I have been thinking about this," he said. "About how you counted every hole and how you made me that beautiful quilt, because you wanted me to be warm. I did want that. I still do. I know, and I am warm now, warmer than I have ever been. Not just because of the quilt but because of you, because of this life we have built." He picked up the old blanket. "I think it is time to let this go. Not throw it away, but pass it on. There is a family in Leadville, new arrivals, and they are struggling. They have 3 children and not enough blankets to keep them warm. I thought I might give them this. It has holes, yes, but it is still serviceable. It might help them get through the winter." Naomi felt her eyes fill with tears. "That is a beautiful gesture, Xavier. Your father would be proud." "I hope so." He folded the blanket carefully. "And someday when Samuel is grown, we will pass on the quilt you made. It will be a family heirloom, something that gets handed down through generations. But right now it is ours. It represents this time in our lives, when we first found each other and built something real." "I love you so much," Naomi said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too, more than words can say." They sat together in front of the fire, baby Samuel sleeping peacefully nearby, and Naomi thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year and a half ago, she had been alone and struggling, resigned to a life of mere survival. Then Xavier had collapsed by her creek and everything had changed. She had counted the holes in his old blanket and seen a man who needed caring for. In return, he had given her love, security, and a future brighter than she had ever imagined. The mountains outside were blanketed in snow, silent and majestic under the starlight. Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with love. As Naomi drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Xavier's arms under the quilt she had made, she felt profound gratitude for the life they had built together. They had both been broken when they met, worn thin by hardship and loneliness. But together, they had mended each other, stitching their lives together like the squares of a quilt, until they formed something beautiful and whole. The years that followed were good ones. Samuel grew into a sturdy, happy child with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. The trading post thrived, becoming a well-known and respected establishment in the high country. Xavier continued to trap in the winter months, though now he never stayed away for more than a few days at a time. He was a devoted husband and father, and his family was his primary focus. In the spring of 1878, Naomi gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah. Xavier was beside himself with joy, declaring that he was now the luckiest man in all of Colorado. The girls were tiny and perfect, with dark hair like their parents and spirits that seemed too large for their small bodies. Samuel was a proud big brother, always wanting to help with his sisters. With 3 children, the cabin had to be expanded again. Xavier added another room and a small loft where Samuel could sleep. He also built a proper barn to replace the lean-to, giving them space for more animals and storage. The property began to look less like a wilderness outpost and more like a real homestead. In 1880, their 4th child was born, another boy they named Thomas after Naomi's father. By this time, the Ashfords were one of the most prominent families in the Leadville area. Their trading post was known for fair dealing and quality goods, and Xavier's reputation as an honest, hard-working man had spread throughout the region. They had built something lasting, something that would endure beyond their own lives. One evening in the fall of 1881, as they sat by the fire after putting the children to bed, Xavier took Naomi's hand. "Do you remember 5 years ago when I asked you to marry me?" "Of course. It was one of the most important days of my life. I told you that I would make you love me, and that if by first snow you did not, I would leave you in peace." He smiled. "I am glad you decided to love me back. How could I not? You are everything I needed and everything I wanted. You saved me, Xavier. We saved each other." He pulled her close. "I was lost before I found you. I was just surviving day after day with no purpose beyond making it through the next winter. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. You gave me a family and a home and a future." Naomi rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. We have been very blessed. Yes, we have. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the pines and the occasional murmur from one of the children's rooms. The quilt Naomi had made still covered their bed, though it showed signs of wear now after years of use. Xavier's old blanket, the one with 23 holes, had indeed gone to that struggling family in Leadville 5 years ago. Naomi had heard they were doing well now, and she liked to think that perhaps the blanket had brought them some of the luck it had brought Xavier. "Do you ever regret it?" Naomi asked softly. "Giving up your solitary life in the mountains?" "Never, not for a single moment." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "That life was empty compared to this. I thought I wanted solitude, but what I really wanted was peace, and I found that with you. I found it with you too." They stayed up late that night, talking about the past and planning for the future. Samuel would start school soon, and they needed to decide whether to send him to the school in Leadville or try to teach him at home. The twins were already showing distinct personalities. Emma quiet and thoughtful, Sarah bold and adventurous. Thomas was still a baby, but already he seemed to have his father's calm temperament. As the fire burned low, Xavier added another log and then turned to Naomi. "I want you to know something. Every morning when I wake up next to you, I am grateful. Grateful that I collapsed by that creek 5 years ago. Grateful that you had the kindness to take in a stranger. Grateful that you gave me a chance to prove myself. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "You are already worthy. You always have been. And I am grateful too. Grateful for every day we have together." They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms under the quilt that had become a symbol of their love. Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the mountains in white. Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the quiet sounds of their sleeping children. Naomi thought back to that day 5 years ago, when she had counted the holes in Xavier's old blanket. 23 holes that had let the cold in, that had left him vulnerable to the harsh mountain weather. She had made him a new quilt, one without holes, one that would keep him warm through the coldest nights. But more than that, they had made a life together, weaving their individual threads into a pattern that was stronger and more beautiful than either could have created alone. The mountain man who had once slept under a blanket full of holes, now slept under a quilt made with love, in a warm cabin surrounded by his family. And the lonely woman who had resigned herself to a life of solitude now had a husband who cherished her, children who needed her, and a future full of promise. As snow continued to fall outside, Naomi drifted off to sleep, warm and content and deeply, profoundly happy. She had counted the holes in his old blanket all those years ago, never imagining that in doing so, she was taking the first step toward a love that would transform both their lives. By first snow, the mountain man had indeed slept under her quilt, and he would continue to do so for the rest of their days together, their lives intertwined as intricately as the stitches that held that quilt together. The winter passed peacefully, and spring came again to the Colorado mountains. Xavier and Naomi worked together as always, managing the trading post and raising their children. Samuel was enrolled in the Leadville school, making the trip down the mountain each day with his father. The twins were growing rapidly, their personalities becoming more defined with each passing month. Thomas was a happy baby, who rarely cried and seemed content to observe the world around him with wide, curious eyes. In the summer of 1882, Xavier's brother Matthew arrived unexpectedly from Ohio. It had been over a decade since the brothers had seen each other, and the reunion was emotional. Matthew had come west hoping to make a fresh start after losing his farm to debt, and Xavier and Naomi welcomed him warmly. They helped him get established in Leadville, where he opened a carpentry shop that quickly gained a reputation for quality work. Having family nearby enriched their lives in unexpected ways. Matthew was a bachelor with no children of his own, and he doted on his nieces and nephews. Samuel especially bonded with his uncle, learning woodworking skills that would serve him well in later years. The twins adored him, following him around whenever he visited and begging for piggyback rides. "You have built something really special here," Matthew told Xavier one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I always thought you were crazy for heading into the mountains alone, but I see now that you found what you were looking for." "I did, though I did not know I was looking for it until I found it. Naomi is a remarkable woman. She is the best person I know." Xavier's voice was filled with quiet pride. "Strong, kind, smart, beautiful. I am a lucky man. She is lucky too. You are a good husband and father, Xavier. Better than I think you give yourself credit for." Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, "I try to be. My children will grow up knowing they are loved and valued, They will never wonder if they matter. That is the most important thing I can give them. That and a good example. You show them every day what it means to be a decent person." The brothers sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Inside, they could hear Naomi singing to the children, her voice sweet and clear. It was a moment of perfect peace, and Xavier felt his heart swell with gratitude for the life he had been given. As the years continued to pass, the Ashford family flourished. In 1884, Naomi gave birth to their fifth child, a daughter they named Catherine. In 1886, their sixth and final child was born, a boy they named Daniel. With 6 children, the cabin was constantly filled with noise and activity. It was chaotic at times, but it was also filled with love and laughter. Xavier proved to be as patient and devoted a father to all 6 children as he had been to Samuel. He made time for each of them individually, teaching them various skills and listening to their concerns. Samuel learned trapping and hunting from his father. The twins learned to ride and shoot. Thomas showed an early aptitude for numbers and helped his mother with the trading post accounts. Catherine was artistic, spending hours drawing the mountains and animals around their home. Daniel was still too young to show his interests, but Xavier was confident the boy would find his own path. Naomi managed the household and the trading post with the same practical efficiency she brought to everything. She had help now, as the older children took on more responsibilities, but she was still the heart of the family. She made sure everyone was fed, clothed, educated, and loved. She settled disputes, tended injuries, and provided the emotional stability that kept the family functioning. "I do not know how you do it," Mrs. Henderson said one day when she visited the cabin. 6 children and a business, and you still manage to look calm." Naomi laughed. "I am not always calm. You should see me on the days when the twins are fighting and Thomas spills the milk and the baby is crying. But I have Xavier and we work together. That makes all the difference. You two are a true partnership. It is rare and beautiful to see. We are blessed. I know that." In the fall of 1887, as they approached their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Naomi took stock of their lives. They had 6 healthy children, a thriving business, a comfortable home, and each other. They had weathered difficulties over the years: hard winters, economic downturns, childhood illnesses, but they had come through stronger each time. 10 years. Naomi marveled one evening as they sat by the fire. The older children were in bed and the younger ones were playing quietly on the floor. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean. Some days I can hardly remember what my life was like before you. Other days I remember it too clearly, and thank God I found you. We found each other." Naomi reached over and took his hand. "I was as lost as you were, maybe more so. I was just going through the motions, surviving but not really living. You showed me how to live again." Xavier brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We saved each other. That is the truth of it." They sat together, hands clasped, watching their children play. The quilt Naomi had made 11 years ago was now quite worn from a decade of use, but it was still serviceable. She had patched it several times, adding new squares to cover the places where the fabric had worn thin. In a way, that seemed fitting. Their life together had also been patched and mended over the years, adapted to accommodate the changes that came with children and time. But the foundation remained strong, built on love and mutual respect and a commitment to face whatever came together. On their actual anniversary, Xavier surprised Naomi with a gift. It was a new quilt, one he had commissioned Mrs. Henderson to make. It was beautiful, done in shades of deep red and cream with an intricate star pattern. "I wanted you to have something new," he explained as Naomi unfolded it with tears in her eyes. "Something that is not worn or patched. You have given so much to me and to our children. You deserve something beautiful that is just for you." "Xavier, this is too much. It is not nearly enough." He pulled her into his arms. "You are my heart, Naomi. Everything good in my life comes from you. 10 years ago you saw a broken man with a blanket full of holes, and instead of turning away you took him in and made him whole. I will never stop being grateful for that." Naomi buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by emotion. "I love you so much. I love you too, more than you will ever know." That night they slept under the new quilt, but Naomi made sure to fold the old one carefully and put it in the trunk. It held too many memories to simply discard. Someday she would give it to one of their children, along with the story of how their parents had met and fallen in love. It would be a family treasure, a reminder of where they had come from and what they had built together. The following years brought the usual mix of joys and challenges. Samuel left home at 18 to attend college in Denver, a decision that filled both Xavier and Naomi with pride and a certain wistfulness. Their firstborn was becoming a man, finding his own way in the world. The twins grew into capable young women who helped run the trading post with increasing independence. Thomas showed a talent for business and talked about expanding the trading post into a full general store. Catherine continued with her art, and several of her drawings now hung on the cabin walls. Daniel was growing into a strong, quiet boy much like his father. In 1892, Samuel returned from Denver with a young woman named Elizabeth whom he intended to marry. She was the daughter of a banker, educated and refined, and Naomi worried that she would find their mountain home too rustic. But Elizabeth proved to be adaptable and warm, and she fit into the family beautifully. Xavier and Naomi gave the young couple their blessing, and the wedding was held in Leadville in the spring of 1893. "Our son is married," Naomi said wonderingly as they danced at the reception. "I can hardly believe it. He chose well. Elizabeth will be good for him. She reminds me a little of myself at that age, trying to find her place in the world." Veer smiled. "Then Samuel is a lucky man, following in his father's footsteps." Life continued its steady march forward. Emma married a rancher from south of Leadville in 1895, and Sarah married a doctor in 1897. Thomas took over management of the trading post, which he had indeed expanded into a general store that served the entire region. Catherine moved to Denver to pursue her art, and while Naomi missed her, she was proud of her daughter's courage in following her dreams. Daniel, the youngest, stayed close to home, working with his father in the trap lines and helping manage the property. By 1900, Xavier and Naomi were grandparents several times over. Samuel and Elizabeth had 3 children, Emma had 2, and Sarah had 1 with another on the way. The cabin that had once held just Xavier and Naomi now regularly hosted family gatherings where multiple generations came together. Xavier was now 51 years old, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, his face lined from years of sun and wind, but he was still strong and vital, still capable of the physical labor that had defined his life. Naomi was 47, and while her hair was also graying and her hands showed the wear of decades of hard work, she was still the same woman Xavier had fallen in love with all those years ago. Her eyes still sparkled with intelligence and warmth, her spirit still unbroken by the challenges life had thrown at her. One evening in the fall of 1900, as they sat on the porch of the cabin that had grown and evolved along with their family, Xavier said, "Do you ever think about that first winter? When I showed up half dead at your creek? Sometimes. Though it seems like another lifetime. You counted the holes in my blanket, 23 of them, I remember. I thought to myself, this man will freeze to death if someone does not take better care of him." Xavier laughed. "And you decided you were that someone. Someone had to do it." Naomi leaned against him, comfortable and content. "I am glad it was me. So am I. Best decision I never made. Collapsing by your creek was the luckiest accident of my life." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The trading post was closed for the day. The grandchildren who had been visiting had gone home with their parents, and it was just the 2 of them again, the way it had been at the beginning. "Do you have any regrets?" Naomi asked softly. "Not a single one, do you?" "No. This life we have built, this family, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. We gave each other everything." Xavier put his arm around her. "And we have years ahead still. Years to watch our grandchildren grow. Years to sit on this porch and count our blessings. I look forward to every one of them." As night fell and the stars emerged, bright and clear in the mountain air, Xavier and Naomi went inside. The cabin was quiet now, almost empty compared to the years when it had been filled with children. But it was still home, still the center of their world. They went to bed under the quilt Mrs. Henderson had made all those years ago for their 10th anniversary. The original quilt, the one Naomi had sewn with such care when they were newlyweds, now belonged to Samuel. She had given it to him when he married, telling him the story of how she had made it for his father, how it represented the love that had grown between them. "This quilt is a symbol of what marriage should be," she had told him. "Strong, warm, made with care and attention. Every stitch represents a choice to love, to commit, to build something lasting. Your father and I chose each other every day, even when things were hard. That is what made our marriage strong." Samuel had accepted the quilt with tears in his eyes, promising to honor the legacy his parents had created, and Naomi had no doubt he would. She and Xavier had not just built a life together. They had created a template for love that their children could follow. As Naomi drifted off to sleep in Xavier's arms, just as she had every night for the past 24 years, she thought about that long-ago autumn day when she had found a mountain man collapsed by her creek. She had counted the holes in his threadbare blanket and made a decision to help him. That simple act of compassion had led to a love that had sustained them through nearly a quarter-century of joys and sorrows, triumphs and trials. She had made him a quilt to replace his worn blanket, and by first snow that year, the mountain man had indeed slept under it. But more than that, he had made a home in her heart, and she in his. They had woven their lives together as surely as she had woven the squares of that quilt, creating something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after they were gone. The mountains outside stood eternal and unchanging, witness to their love story. Inside the cabin, Xavier and Naomi slept peacefully, still choosing each other, still grateful for the life they had built, still deeply, profoundly in love. The holes in that old blanket had led to this, to a lifetime of warmth and love and family. And neither of them would have changed a single moment of the journey that had brought them here. Years continued to flow by like the creek that ran behind their property, steady and persistent. In 1905, Thomas married a woman named Margaret from Denver, and they took over operation of the general store completely, allowing Xavier and Naomi to step back from the daily management. Daniel married a local woman named Clara in 1906, and they built a small house on the property, close enough to help Xavier with the trap lines but far enough to have their own space. Catherine remained unmarried, focused on her art career in Denver, but she visited regularly and had become quite successful. Her paintings of mountain landscapes were sold in galleries throughout Colorado and beyond, and Xavier and Naomi could not have been prouder. She had found her calling and pursued it with the same determination her mother had shown in building the trading post. By 1910, Xavier was 61 and Naomi was 57. They had been married for 33 years and their love had only deepened with time. Xavier's body was beginning to show the wear of a lifetime of hard physical labor. His joints ached in cold weather and he moved more slowly than he once had. But his spirit remained strong and he still made his trap lines every winter, though now Daniel accompanied him. Naomi's hands were gnarled with arthritis, making the fine needlework she had once loved difficult. But she adapted, finding other ways to be useful. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days and passing on the wisdom she had accumulated. She also took up writing, recording the history of the family and the trading post, so that future generations would know where they came from. One winter evening, as they sat by the fire in the cabin that had been their home for over 3 decades, Naomi was paging through her journal when she came across an entry from November 1866, just after they had married. "Listen to this," she said to Xavier. "I wrote, 'Today I married Xavier Ashford, a mountain man who came into my life when I least expected it. I do not know what the future holds, but I know that with him beside me, I can face anything. He is strong and kind and good, and I am grateful beyond words that he chose me.'" Xavier smiled. "You were right, we have faced everything together." "Yes, we have." Naomi closed the journal. 33 years, Xavier. Where has the time gone? Into building this life, into raising our children, into loving each other." He reached over and took her hand. "I would not trade a single moment of it, neither would I." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn. The quilt that covered their bed now was actually the third one they had owned. The second had worn out after years of use, and Naomi had made a new one 5 years ago, this time with help from Emma and Sarah. It was made from soft cotton in shades of green and gold, and while Naomi's stitches were not as precise as they had been in her youth, the love sewn into it was just as strong. Xavier's original blanket, the one with 23 holes, had become something of a family legend. All the grandchildren had heard the story of how grandmother Naomi had counted the holes and decided to make grandfather Xavier a proper quilt. It was a story about love and care, about seeing a need and filling it, about 2 lonely people finding each other and building something beautiful. In the spring of 1912, Xavier and Naomi celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. All 6 of their children came to visit, along with their spouses and children. The cabin and surrounding property were filled with people, noise, and laughter. There was a huge feast, with tables set up outside because there was not room inside for everyone. Xavier looked around at the gathering, at the family he and Naomi had created, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "Look at what we have made," he said to Naomi as they watched their grandchildren play. "All of this came from 2 lonely people who found each other in the wilderness. It is pretty remarkable, is it not? It is a miracle." Samuel stood and called for everyone's attention. "I want to make a toast," he announced, raising his glass. "To my parents, Xavier and Naomi Ashford. 35 years ago, my father was a mountain man with nothing but a worn-out blanket and a fierce desire to survive. My mother was a widow running a trading post alone in the high country. They found each other, and from that meeting came all of this." He gestured to the assembled family. 6 children, 17 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild on the way. But more than that, they showed us what love looks like, what commitment means, what it takes to build something lasting. Everyone raised their glasses and drank. Then Emma spoke up. "We have a gift for you," she said, and Sarah brought forward a large bundle wrapped in cloth. Xavier and Naomi unwrapped it together and gasped. It was a quilt, but unlike any they had seen before. Each square had been embroidered with a scene from their life together. There was the cabin, the creek where Naomi had found Xavier, the church where they had married, images of each of their children as babies, the trading post, the mountains. It was a visual history of their life, lovingly created by their daughters and daughters-in-law. "This is beautiful," Naomi whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "We wanted you to have something that showed how much your love has meant to us," Catherine explained. "Everything we are, everything we have, it all started with the two of you choosing each other." Xavier could not speak. He simply held the quilt, overcome with emotion. His children had created something that perfectly captured the life he and Naomi had built. It was a testament to love, to family, to the power of two people committing to each other, and seeing that commitment through no matter what. That night, after all the guests had left or settled down to sleep in various corners of the expanded cabin and Daniel's house, Xavier and Naomi went to bed under the new quilt. They lay together, examining each embroidered square, remembering the moments captured there. "We have had a good life," Xavier said quietly. "The best life," Naomi agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. When I collapsed by your creek all those years ago, I thought my life was over. I was sick and alone and convinced I would die in the wilderness. Instead, I found you. I found love and family and purpose. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. And you saved me. I was so lonely, Xavier, so tired of fighting to survive on my own. You gave me partnership and love and a reason to hope again. We saved each other." They held each other close. Two people who had weathered 35 years of marriage and come out stronger. The quilt their children had made covered them, a tangible representation of the love they had built and the family they had created. Xavier and Naomi lived many more years together, watching their family continue to grow and flourish. They saw great-grandchildren born, saw their children become grandparents themselves. The trading post Daniel and Thomas ran became one of the most successful businesses in the region. Catherine's art gained national recognition. Samuel became a prominent lawyer in Denver. Emma and Sarah raised large, happy families on their respective properties. Through it all, Xavier and Naomi remained at the center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love was the example all the others followed, the standard by which they measured their own relationships. They had shown their children that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a daily commitment to put someone else's needs alongside your own, to build something together that was stronger than what either could create alone. In the winter of 1920, Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71. He and Naomi had been married for 43 years. Naomi was heartbroken, as anyone would be losing the love of their life, but she was also grateful. Grateful for the decades they had shared, for the family they had built, for every moment they had been given together. She lived 3 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her dearly. She spent her final years recording more stories, making sure the family history was preserved. She told anyone who would listen about the mountain man with the blanket full of holes, about how she had counted each one and decided to make him a quilt, about how that simple act had led to a lifetime of love. When Naomi passed away in the spring of 1923 at the age of 70, she was buried next to Xavier in the cemetery in Leadville. Their graves overlooked the mountains they had both loved, the wilderness that had brought them together. The headstone read simply, "Xavier and Naomi Ashford, they chose each other." The family gathered after the funeral, and Samuel brought out the very first quilt his mother had made for his father all those years ago. It was carefully preserved, a treasured heirloom that had been passed down as Naomi had intended. "This quilt represents everything our parents believed in," Samuel told the assembled family. "Love, commitment, care, the willingness to see a need and meet it. My mother counted the holes in my father's blanket and made him this to keep him warm. But it was about so much more than warmth. It was about showing him he mattered, that he was worth caring for, that he did not have to face the cold alone anymore." He spread the quilt out so everyone could see it. The fabric was faded now, the stitches showing their age, but it was still intact, still functional. "My parents built a family and a legacy that will endure for generations. And it all started with a simple act of kindness, with a woman who saw a man in need and chose to help him. Let us honor their memory by following their example. Let us choose love every day the way they did. The family agreed, and the quilt was carefully folded and placed in a place of honor in what was now the family home, the cabin where it had all begun. It would remain there for decades, a reminder of where they had come from and the love that had created them all. Years turned into decades, and the Ashford family continued to grow and prosper. The story of Xavier and Naomi became a treasured family legend, passed down from generation to generation. Children grew up hearing about the mountain man with the blanket full of holes and the woman who had counted everyone, about the quilt she had made and the love that had grown between them. The cabin where they had lived was eventually turned into a museum of sorts, preserving the history of the family in the early days of the trading post. The quilts Naomi had made were displayed there, protected behind glass but still visible, still testament to her skill and love. Visitors would come to see them and hear the story, and many left feeling inspired by the example of two people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something lasting. The trading post Thomas had expanded eventually became a large department store with multiple locations throughout Colorado. But every store had a small display dedicated to Xavier and Naomi, telling their story and honoring their legacy. The current generation of Ashfords never forgot where they had come from or the love that had made it all possible. And high in the Colorado mountains, in a small cemetery overlooking the peaks, two graves sat side by side just as Xavier and Naomi had sat side by side through 43 years of marriage. The mountains stood eternal around them, unchanged by the passage of time, witness to a love story that had begun with 23 holes in an old blanket and a woman compassionate enough to count them all. By first snow that long ago year, the mountain man had indeed slept under her quilt. But more importantly, he had found his home, not in a place but in a person, and she had found hers in him. Together they had created something beautiful and enduring, a love that transcended their own lives and became a legacy for all who came after. The holes in that old blanket had led to wholeness, to healing, to a love that had quite literally changed everything, and that, their descendants agreed, was the greatest gift Xavier and Naomi had given them all. The example of what love could accomplish when two people chose each other, every day, through every season, for a lifetime.